the onslaught of several high esteemed polls that are looked at as, wow, this is a legit poll. Washington Post, CNN, both painting very stark pictures for the re-election of Joe Biden. And coupled that along with the Washington Post, David Ignatia writing an article that Joe Biden should not run. All of this is about a panic. This panic is about what we can do. Our regular propaganda is not working. And there's been several articles basically saying we need to turn the notch up on our propaganda. And the thing is, I'm thinking like, I can't even understand how this could be at a more high fever pitch than it is already. But that is literally what they're saying. They're basically calling for more censorship on how you cover Donald Trump in order to affect his poll numbers. Stop covering him like a regular candidate is basically what the call for in this article and a couple of other articles and the segment on Joe Biden. But let me just read the headline here. This is Vanity Fair. Let's not sleepwalk into another Trump presidency. The GOP, I'm reading the subheadline, the GOP frontrunner's treason talk makes clear yet again that he's a danger to democracy. And she spells democracy with a lowercase d. I find that funny. But this is by Molly Jong Fast. And let me just show you who she is. She's a regular, or she's been more regular. Let's put it that way. She's been more regular on Morning Joe. And this is her. This is what she looks like. If you may recognize her now that you see her picture. And we're going to be going to a clip, the segment with her. But she's the host of a podcast apparently, and she is she absolutely has Trump derangement syndrome. So let me bring up the Morning Joe clip first. So let's, Morning Joe is a regular here because we cover Morning Joe because this is the gold standard of propaganda in cable news is Morning Joe. The establishment on both sides, red and blue, watch Morning Joe. So that's why we use Morning Joe. Now, we're not going to read the article. It's kind of a litany of them just basically going through all the things that why he's scary. But they go through all the points in the segment. So we don't need to read the article because the segment really does cover all of what they do in the cover in the article. So let's listen to Morning Joe and listen to the cope here, or the fear and the panic.
We want to read now from Molly's latest piece for Vanity Fair entitled, "Let's Not Sleepwalk into Another Trump Presidency." And Molly, you write in part this: the media isn't taking the former guy returning to power seriously enough. With the 2024 cycle in full swing, he's being largely covered like a normal candidate rather than someone
we can't have that.
To end democracy. One has to wonder why there isn't more coverage about Trump musing about sentencing the nation's highest-ranking general to death than, say, the age of the current president. Trump routinely attacked journalists during his 4 years in office, now eyeing a return to the White House. Trump is only ramping up the anti-press rhetoric by accusing a media company of country-threatening treason. As anyone who lived through the past 8 years can attest, you underestimate Trump at your own peril. Trump is not getting better. If anything, he's getting worse. I understand the mainstream media may be bored with the crazy, but our country is once again sleepwalking into disaster. And if journalists aren't clear about the stakes of a second Trump presidency, it will be, at least partially, our fault.
Well, and Molly, of course, we're quite aware here at this desk about Donald Trump threatening journalists. Mika talked about the face shaming episode. He accused me of murder 12 times and suggested that I be tried for murder. Continued doing that because he was angry.
And that's had consequences in our life.
It's had significant consequences in our life. Matt Gaetz.
I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has. Millionaire, privileged people. I'm sure you've had lots of consequences. You are going through it. I know. I'm gonna rewind it because I want to listen to what they say in the beginning again.
We want to read now from Molly's latest piece for Vanity Fair entitled "Let's Not Sleepwalk into Another Trump Presidency." And Molly, you write in part this: the media isn't taking the former guy returning to power seriously enough. With the 2024 cycle in full swing, he's being largely covered like a normal candidate rather than someone who tried to end democracy.
I don't know what they're watching. I watch all of these networks. That's all they have on these networks is that Trump is bad. That's all they have on these networks is that they're treating Trump not like a regular candidate. They don't go to his news conferences. They go away from him. They're already doing this. So this is why I say this is mind-blowing to me that they're saying what they're describing is not what I'm seeing. So that could only mean they think this needs to be turned up a notch. And I have an article that kind of couples with this, and that's exactly what they're talking about. And let's bring actually let me play a little more of the clip and before I bring up the actual article.
One has to wonder why there isn't more coverage about Trump musing about sentencing the nation's highest ranking general to death than, say, the age of the current president. Trump routinely attacked journalists during his 4 years in office, now eyeing a return to the.
So you hear that instead of the age. So that's another thing. So it feels like this segment is an instructional segment meant, since they can't do what they do with the Twitter files, just tell people. This segment is meant to instruct the press on how to move forward with covering Trump. You're to tamp down your coverage on Hunter Biden. You're to, tamp down your coverage on anything outside of this guy is a deranged person that cannot reach the White House. Let's listen.
White House, Trump is only ramping up the anti-press rhetoric by accusing a media company of country-threatening treason. As anyone who lived through the past 8 years can attest, you underestimate Trump at your own peril. Trump is not getting better. If anything, he's getting worse. I understand the mainstream media may be bored with the crazy, but our country is once again sleepwalking into disaster. And if journalists aren't clear about the stakes of a second Trump presidency, it will be, at least partially, our fault.
Well, and Molly, of course, we're quite aware here at this desk about Donald Trump threatening journalists. Mika talked about the face shaming episode. He accused me of murder 12 times and suggested that I be tried for murder. Continued doing that because he was angry.
And that's had consequences in our life.
It's had significant consequences in our life. Matt Gaetz took conspiracy theories into Donald Trump in the White House, and Donald Trump gobbled them up, spit them out, and consequences be damned. But again, it does democracy a grave disservice when he's going after reporters, like you said. Also, he's now saying that he's going to ban entire networks that he doesn't like. And a couple of weeks ago was talking about arresting Democrats, just randomly arresting Democrats after he got elected president of the United States. I always say this is like Orban, but no, Orban wasn't even this outspoken when he was running for office. I don't think Erdogan in Turkey is this outspoken when he's running for office. This is a guy who is mimicking Vladimir Putin. Just
of course,
saying the
Vladimir Putin
out loud.
Yeah, it's really scary. His plans for a second term are autocracy at best.
Oh,
I mean,
God.
He is really
that.
scary at this point. And I think that a lot of the mainstream media, the straight reporters, are worried about looking biased. And so they don't want to cover Trump, because if you cover him in this way,
crazy?
It's accurate, you seem like a partisan because what he says is so insane.
She's saying if you cover him accurately, he's so insane, you seem like a partisan. They're already doing that. So I'm curious to see what does this world look like if we had what you want to get, Molly? Like, what would that look like? Because to me, exactly what you're describing is what's already happening.
And I think that they are really worried. And look, conservatives have worked the refs, right? They have made it so that anytime there's a sort of unflattering Trump headline or unflattering, they say, well, this is obviously partisanship, and obviously the liberal New York Times, the liberal Washington Post. And so you really do see this sort of overcorrection. And I think that Trump is banking on that.
Do you hear the censorship in that? They don't even want you saying anything outside of negative about the Trump side. Like, don't reflect even in a neutral way. All of your reflections, all of your analysis needs to be from the perspective that this guy is dangerous. Don't even mention any sort of dull, nondescript wording. It needs to be bad or nothing. But we don't see this as censorship. We don't see this as a problem. The Democrats don't see this as a problem, or those are Democrats that they are on the team with the Democrats. You don't see this as a problem. It gets worse, people. They haven't even gotten to the worst part.
The liberal New York Times, the liberal Washington Post. And so you really do see this sort of overcorrection. And I think that Trump is banking on that. And I do also think it's hard to cover this level of crazy. The mechanisms in traditional journalism are not made for someone who has absolutely no regard for truth.
And Molly, over a decade, he has numbed many people, his supporters, but also members of the media. So when he puts up a post that says, Mark Milley, decorated Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, in better days, as Trump put it, would be hanged for treason. People go, oh, there he goes.
And what's the problem? This civility politics thing, this is like, what did he say? What's wrong with that? That's how he feels about that guy. And what's your point? Are we as workers, as a working class and poor, are we supposed to care that a billionaire oligarch is threatening an imperialist, a person in the leadership of an imperialist army that's responsible for the deaths and murders of millions of people? What does that do? Don't give not a single F about any sort of thing that Donald Trump says about this guy. But you notice that a lot of the things they say about Donald Trump, it's about civility politics. It's about being in a refusing to use certain language, certain words in polite settings. And I'm not with that. And I think that's sort of what is appealing to about Donald Trump by the people who support him.
Again, it's not no. So I think it's, as to your point, it's on us, it's on the media, it's on everybody to not be numb to it. Yeah. Just every time he does something like that, just say, no, this is not normal. We can't have our politics, our country be like this.
And it gets lost in the shuffle. I mean, a week before, Trump went after liberal Jews on Rosh Hashanah. And that was like a crazy thing. If you're with us, you have to be with us. If you care about Israel, one of the most anti-Semitic tropes that you can get involved in. And it just was lost in the shuffle. And I do think people are really scared of swinging at every pitch. But if you don't draw attention to this craziness, Trump will get reelected, and it will be in some way our fault.
I have thought about this a lot. Meaning, I think that it was sort of true even prior to Trump that that the media could overcorrect in terms of covering Democrats versus Republicans as to not appear biased. But do you think that I feel like there's also an element that people don't want to feel
like am I in a Twilight Zone? Like, Do we think they really believe this? Do we think they really believe that the media is somehow covering Donald Trump in sort of positive light? This is a really bizarre segment. Let's continue.
Again, like that they're shocked by what Trump did. There seems to be a reluctance to be shocked because then you seem naive, unsophisticated. I'm not like, what do you think that is?
I mean, I think, look, Trump got through, $2 billion of free media. Those were the estimates after 2016. So you don't want to cover him in this incredulous way where you're like, Trump says something racist. Oh, and you repeat the lie. Like, you do want to focus on the kind of truth sandwich element. You don't want to quote him incredulously. But I also think, this is like
You see what I mean by this is really an instructive. This is instructions for the media moving forward. And the reason I say that is the way they're talking and also what show they're appearing on, which is Morning Joe.
911 for democracy, right? Like,
totally.
There's nothing more important than.
Oh my God. These January 6th democracy people, Constitution.
$2 billion of free media. Those were the estimates after 2016. So you don't want to cover him in this incredulous way where you're like, Trump says something racist. Oh, and you repeat the lie. Like, you do want to focus on the kind of truth sandwich element. You don't want to quote him incredulously. But I also think, this is like a 911 for democracy.
Oh
right?
my God.
There's nothing more important than keeping our democracy. And we saw with Trump's first season as president that, that presidency barely ended by his own will.
John, Republicans, particularly in the House, who've looked the other way on all that Donald Trump has done from January 6th, the continued lies about the election, all these indictments have set up Hunter Biden as some sort of an equivalent to that. Press, why aren't you covering the Hunter Biden story the way that you covered January 6th?
You see why I say this is instructive? They're telling you what to cover and what not to cover, how to cover, what questions to ask, how to ask the questions, what answers will you accept. Now they're basically saying, stop covering the Hunter Biden story. People, man.
Barely ended by his own will.
John, Republicans, particularly in the House, who've looked the other way on all that Donald Trump has done from January 6th, the continued lies about the election, all these indictments have set up Hunter Biden as some sort of an equivalent to that. Press, why aren't you covering the Hunter Biden story the way that you covered January 6th, as if there's an equivalency there? That's how they're pitching it.
Yeah, it's whataboutism in the highest form. And to Molly's point, they have worked the refs. They claim bias. They claim prejudice.
Who are the refs? They've worked the refs. Who are the refs? Are you trying to say they've worked journalists? Are they actually saying that Donald Trump has friends in media and they're being friendly to him? And what if this is friendly, what we're seeing, what does it look like what they're describing? That's what I want to see. What does that look like?
From the media, if any time they've adopted Trump's philosophy that fake news does not apply to a story that's not true. It just applies to a story that's negative that he doesn't like. And that is now the sort of ethos of the Republican Party. And look, this is a challenge for the media. We I think largely felt.
This is a challenge for the media. They're telling the media exactly how to cover Trump. This is an escalation in the fight against Trump. This is what they have decided to roll out after the panic over all of these polls that clearly show Joe Biden is going to lose. Joe Biden doesn't have any positives in the details of the poll. Joe Biden is upside down in everything. From the economy to how he's handling the Ukraine war everything, inflation, he's upside down on everything. His 75%, are you concerned with his age? 75%. They need to replace Joe Biden.
Down on the job in 2016 in many ways, improved for 2020, no doubt. Realized you couldn't just take Trump live. You couldn't just put it in a tweet or a cable chyron.
He's saying that, yeah, 2016, we let the dogs out. 2020, we brought it back a little bit. We just can't go to him anytime, but we got to take it even up another notch here. And that's the call to the media. He's making a call to the media. It's time to turn this shit up. It's time to get way more it's time to be way more restrictive. It's time to be way more biased, if you can do that.
No doubt. Realized you couldn't just take Trump live. You couldn't just put it in a tweet or a cable chyron. You had to provide fact checking. You had to provide context. You sometimes had to say, no, he's lying right now. And I think that we have done that. But we have a long way to go. It's not perfect. We've never had a candidate like this before, an insurrectionist candidate, someone who threatened to overthrow our democracy, and he can't be treated just like anybody else.
I agree.
Yeah, it took me a while. We hung up on him and started, again, and I've got to say, I don't know how anybody, and I've been called and people have asked me my opinion because we've known Trump for a long time. How do you interview Trump? You start by asking the question that a lot of people ask. And you have to ask this question. Is Joe Biden president of the United States? Do you still believe that Joe Biden? And then you just hammer him. And you can't let it go.
Go back to January 6th is what his suggestion is.
Well, this guy is still talking about stealing democracy and overturning a presidential election.
An acceptance of a lie. And you can't do that. That's a disservice to viewers or readers.
Yeah, we saw what happened when Mehdi had Vivek on. And he just kept going back to the same question over and over and over again because Vivek was just shooting all over the place, trying to distract, trying to move on to something else. We'll throw an insult out here. It's pure. It's straight out of the Donald Trump playbook. And you just can't do it. You have to stay focused on the issue at hand. And as we move forward, it is true that Trumpers have played the refs. And they're constantly playing the refs. And so, Molly, we got to go, but I just want to go back to you.
Understand who are the refs? The refs are you guys. Are you guys giving him positive coverage? Is CNN giving him positive coverage? Is WAPO giving him positive coverage? Are you trying to say the Kristen Welker video on Meet the Press? Remember, they're asking for her head on a plate for simply having him on.
This one
but these people aren't the problem. They aren't the ones who are exhibiting the fascistic behavior. Attempting to jail your political opponents, that's fascistic behavior. Telling people not to put opposition on in order to get your candidate elected, that's fascistic behavior, Molly.
It's just the insanity of the playing of the refs on like the Hunter Biden laptop. I had somebody very well respected in the media who, likes to think of himself as a truth teller, right? Oh, I'm going to tell the truth against what the mainstream media says. I'm progressive, but I'm a truth teller, right? And so after Donald Trump was contesting the election, he goes, yeah, that's bad. But what about Hunter Biden's laptop? I'm like, what? I'm sorry. We're in the middle of an American presidential election being stolen. Yeah, there have been articles written about Hunter Biden's laptop, and I sent him like 4 or 5, articles about Hunter Biden, and sending articles that have been written in the past about Hunter Biden and some of the questionable business dealings he did going back to 2019, 2020, before the Biden campaign. And then after January 6th, the same emails. Yeah, you're talking about this so much. What about Hunter Biden's laptop? Well, I mean, you saw what YouTube.
That's because January 6th was a joke, and you guys are overplaying the idea that the majority of people buy that garbage, and that's just garbage. If the FBI, who was in the crowd, is not center stage at any January 6th trial, it is a joke. A joke. But I don't want to, I'm going to stop it here so I can get to the article, because just for the sake of time, I won't finish that there. There are some more good parts of that video, so if you have time, go watch it yourself. But for the sake of time, so I can get through some of these, I do want to get to this accompanying article for this segment, because it speaks to what I was saying. This is the article that's telling media to do the same thing. You're being too nice on Donald Trump. You need to turn this shit up. That's literally what is being said in this article right here. And let me read. That's the writer right there. U.S. news organizations have turned Biden's age into a scandal and continue to cover Trump as an entertaining sideshow. I don't know. What are they watching? What are they watching? Christiane, I'm poor, has reported all over the world. So she recognizes a democracy on the brink when she sees one. Right. Last week, as she celebrated her 40 years at CNN, she issued a challenge to her fellow journalists in the U.S. by describing how she would cover U.S. politics as a foreign correspondent. Quote, "We have to be truthful, not neutral," she urged. Quote, "I would make sure that you don't just give a platform to those who want to crash down the Constitution and democracy. Don't bring those people on to talk. Stop talking to people." It's an important call to action, but so far the American press is failing to meet its responsibility to adequately emphasize the stakes of the coming election. Here's some of what is going wrong. I can't believe this is their take about U.S. media. This is let me just read it. This is weird to me. Here's their first bullet point. News organizations have turned Biden's age, granted a legitimate concern, it's a legitimate concern, into the equivalent of a scandal. Now, how would you turn reporting the news that by your own definition is a legitimate concern? How is it a scandal just reporting it? How is it a scandal that you ask a question about his mental acuity and you get the results you get, but now it's a scandal for simply reporting on it? Or are you suggesting they need to report on it in a different way? In the way that the Biden administration kind of tried to flip this age thing. Make it more like a Ronald Reagan thing where, yeah, I'm old, but I'm just going to make fun of it and make it seem like it's not a big deal. So basically to trivialize the issue with his age. And the fact that they've been saying it's a big issue is what they are saying is equivalent of a scandal. In story after story, headline after headline, they emphasize not his administration's accomplishments, but the fact that he's 80. That's because they're not supposed to be advocates of the president. So if they're going to emphasize his accomplishments instead of just reporting news, then people are going to call you in the bag for Joe Biden. So that's not going to have a good result. But let me continue. A New York Times headline during his recent diplomatic mission to Asia epitomized this, turning the president's joke about jet lag into an impression of a doddering fool. Quote, it is evening. It isn't. I'm sorry. It is evening, isn't it? An 80-year-old president whirlwind trip. This is what they have a problem with. This is what they say is a scandal about his age. That's the scandal. Or that's scandalous to them. I said that way. Vox nailed the problem. Quote, this is Vox. I'm sorry, Ian from Vox. And that's Vox, V as in Victor, OX for those that's listening. Quote, I worry that the Biden is old coverage is starting to take on the same character as the 2016 but her emails coverage. That's absurd. Find something that is genuinely suboptimal about the Democratic candidate and dwell on it endlessly to balance coverage of criminal in charge of the GOP. These people are literally saying to go dark on Trump other than only like not even opinions. Like when you go to the round table, they're reporting your opinion is not to reflect anything but negative, not even neutral. I continue. Here's the second bullet point. The evidence-free Biden impeachment efforts in the House of Representatives are presented to the new consumer without sufficient context. In the first round of the headlines last week, most news outlets simply reported what Speaker Kevin McCarthy was doing as if it was completely legitimate. The results of his likely high crimes and misdemeanors. The Washington Post presented it like seriously. Quote, Kevin Hart directs House committee to open formal Biden impeachment inquiry. There's a problem with that. There's a problem with that. So you see how that's kind of a neutral. He's there just basically saying this is the person who did it. That is a fact. He directed a House committee. That is a fact. To open a formal impeachment inquiry. These are all factual words without adjectives added to color what they're saying. That's a problem. Adding in a credulous line, the inquiry will center on whether President Biden benefits from his son's business dealings, end quote. No hint of what is really happening here. You're supposed to give your context as a reporter now. In this case, the New York Times was a welcome exception. This is the New York Times. So this is the New York Times version of this. And they're saying this is what we should be doing. McCarthy, facing an ouster and a shutdown, orders an impeachment inquiry. That's more like it. So like I said, this article, along with people in media like Morning Joe, and that's an important show for propaganda, they're saying we need to turn the screws on our propaganda and turn this shit up. And that's literally what they're saying here.